Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Hobby Night. I am Angela, and today we will be finishing up our Abhorrant Archregent that we started our base of last week. So I have him here, and I have him in two pieces, as you can see. He has the arm separate from the body, primarily because this wraps in front of the body and would make painting the chest portion a lot more difficult. So we just kept it separate to keep it easy. The thing that we are going to start with today is going to be doing his flesh tone. So for once, I'm actually not using a contrast paint. We are going to be working with Pallid Witch Flesh and basing his entire body in this tone, including the between parts of his wings. And then after that set, or after that dries and everything, what we will then do is we are going to glaze a little bit of a flesh tone over him to give him sort of a sunburnt look, because his base, as you can see, if you remember from last week, has a little bit of a desert theme. And so I like the idea of him being sort of trapped in the desert, and he may be out in daylight, and so his skin is starting to crisp. So we're going to go ahead and glaze him in, I think, either Guilliman flesh or I also have out Gore-Grunter fur, or I don't know where the other one that I had out was. Oh, right. Dracoth flesh. So one of those ones we'll do because it'll have a little bit of a red hue to it. So let's go ahead and get started with the Pallid Witch Flesh. We'll shake it up, make sure it is all mixed together, because sometimes they can settle, and I haven't used this particular pot in a while. And then we'll use our medium shade brush just to get some onto our palette. And I'll probably switch to a slightly smaller brush after we're done with the legs and maybe the arm. Probably the small base or something like that, only because he's got a little bit of like detail work, and I want to try to be not super clean, but as little cleanup as I have to, just because he has a lot of little detail work. So we've watered our paint down with some water, obviously, and we'll go ahead and start laying this color down. I chose to prime him in Gray Seer, which I think I talked about a little bit in the last video. But the reason I did that is because it'll have a little bit of a, I don't know, I think a better like deathly hue beneath this lighter, warmer flesh tone, which will give us some nice depth to our final look. And we have finished our Pallid Witch Flesh on the main guy and his arm, as you can see here. You can see a little tint of blue. Well, I can. I don't know if the camera is quite picking up, but there's a very slight hint of the blue of the Gray Seer still coming through, which is exactly what I want, because it's a very nice undead-ish color, and that since he's a vampire, it works with that. So our next step is we are going to glaze on top of all of the flesh a layer of Snakebite leather. What we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of Lahmian medium into the Snakebite leather to water it down, which will create our glaze. A glaze, if you're not familiar with the concept, is essentially a very thinned paint that you then layer over top to get a sort of transparent effect of layering some colors. And so that's what we're looking to do with the skin, because we want it to have a sunburnt look. I'm going to grab my monster brush from Army Painter, get some of our Snakebite out onto our leather, or onto our Snakebite leather onto our palette, rather. Words, I can say them sometimes. And then clean our brush, because we don't want to get any of that color into our Lahmian medium. That would be very bad. Shake that a little bit. The Lahmian medium, in my experience, is a little bubbly. That's just how it is. It will not dry with bubbles in your paint or anything like that, at least not normally in my experience. All right, so we have a very nice, let me see if I can pull this over here. So this is what we're looking at here. A very nice, very pale leather brown that we're going to now just sort of gently layer over top the miniature. As you can see, I took him off of the cork. What was happening is the putty I was using to keep him on there, because it does sort of get more tacky as it heats up. My fingers were right next to it, and I think the heat from my fingers was causing it to warm up, and he was sliding too much. So we are now going to just very gently glaze some of this color over and give him a nice sort of tanned look. His claws we're going to end up doing in a black, so if you get any of this, like if I get any of this on the claws or anything like that, it's not a huge deal. We'll be covering that, so not have to be too worried. And since this is a glaze, if it gets on other things as well, like on the miniature, like this armor piece or whatever, it'll be very easy to cover up with some base coat again and just, you know, hide. So not a problem there. As you can see, we have finished our glazing of the leather, the Snakebite leather over all of his skin. And I think we got a really nice sort of bleached, sort of tanned look. What I'm probably going to now do is, one, we're going to pick out the flesh in between the fingers here on his wings. Or on his arm wing things. And then we're going to also go ahead and pick out, like, he's got these little tufts of fur on his feet and back here on his thigh. So we're going to go ahead and pick those out, and if we see any other fur places, like I'm seeing a little bit on his arm here, we'll pick those out as a separate color as well. I think for that I'm going to use the Gorgrunta fur. I want it to sort of blend with this leather, but have a little bit of a redder tone to it. And then what I also will probably do in this stage, just because I already have a little bit of my glaze still out, but I also just have the leather available, is any of the little leather straps on his outfit, like this piece here holding his shoulder plate piece on. I know that he has a little belt that his loincloth is being held up with, so that we will go ahead and also put the Snakebite leather on, but in a, you know, deeper consistency, not any watered down by the Lahmian medium or anything like that, because we don't want it to be thinned. We want it to show the truest dark leather color that we can. So let's go ahead and get started with our Gorgrunta fur and start putting some of this on the wings. We will use our medium, or our monster brush again. Some of that on my palette. Yeah, this will give it a nice additional red color tone, but we're going to glaze this probably a little bit too, the Gorgrunta, because I don't want it to be too saturated or dark in comparison to how lovely pale and kind of sickly yellow his really kind of ivory. It's a really nice ivory color, honestly, that his skin has become. So let me get my Lahmian medium again. Dip that right in there. And we'll begin our second portion of the glaze. I'm actually going to switch to a thinner brush, or a smaller brush rather, because we're doing a little bit more of a detailed area, and I'm worried that the monster brush is going to be too thick, and we're going to end up getting this red places we don't want. Hopefully you guys can see this. Alright, so we have finished the glaze of the Gorgrunta fur. I've also, I don't know if you can see it, but like there's a couple of leather bits here on his belt, you know, basically all the way around and everything, so we leathered those up. We did the other arm, and then I also went ahead and glazed, because I had actually forgotten to, his fingers and his toes on the base portion itself. So that is all glazed. We've done that color palette. Now, the next step is just to do some of the detail work. So we're going to start with the armor piece and the cloth, but then we're also going to like touch up the skulls, get these bones here, and, you know, do our final steps before we do a potential dry brush. I haven't fully decided. I really am loving how his skin turned out. I don't really know what more to say about it other than I'm very pleased with the color. It is like a very golden color, and it works very well, and oddly works well for a vampire, despite the fact that normally they're very pale. But what I was thinking of possibly doing to pull some of that pale color tone back out is doing a dry brush of our Pallid Witch Flesh. But I'm going to hold off on that until closer near to the end, because that might be a very light one. If I do a dry brush at all, it's going to be very light, but I haven't fully decided. So we'll come back to that. But in the meantime, I'm going to pull out some Blood Angels Red, because I'm going to go ahead and paint his loincloth in that color, as well as there's a tiny little like emblem or something here on his shoulder pad that I would also like to be red. And if there's any other little things in here, I'll pop those out. But it's mostly going to be the loincloth in that one little section. So let's get started. We'll probably have to layer the Blood Angels a bit. As we saw when we were doing the base last time, the Blood Angels is a little thinner than, say, the Flesh Tearers, but I like the brighter red. And so we may just have to thin it or layer it a bit before we get a full color that I want. But let's go ahead and get this on. Honestly, this is actually sticking better than it did previously, so we may not have to do too much of an extra layer. Detail paint is on and completed, and now we are basically at the stage where we are going to glue this bad boy on once I figure out how to put that in there again, and then we'll get him also attached to his base. So as you can see, we went ahead and did a little bit of detail work in the mouth. That is the only place we actually used Flesh Tearer, which I think these are the Flesh Eater quartz or something like that. So somewhat appropriate on his tongue and everything. We have the Blood Angels red on his cloak. I did notice that on what the actual symbol on his armor piece was a shield, and I had forgotten, although it makes sense now with the look of this miniature, that these characters are, I think, lore-wise supposed to be like what's left of Bretonnia in Age of Sigmar, like in that world. And so I went ahead and put the matching crest on his shoulder piece here, and I even sort of did it, and I really doubt you'll be able to see this on camera, but maybe I'll get a detailed shot of it and put it on Instagram. But I actually put it on his sword as well, because there was a small shield on the sword buckle, or like on the hilt as well. So we went ahead and did that, and let's go ahead and get this guy glued together. Let me just grab some of my glue, and we're going to fit him real fast just to make sure that we've got this. And then basically after we get him glued together, we're going to attach him to the base, and we're going to do a final touch-up of his skin. There's a couple of places where either my fingers may have just rubbed some stuff off a little bit over time of handling him, and that kind of thing. So we'll just need to do a little bit of touch-up, and then we'll do a wash of Agrax Earthshade over his skin and the red of his cloak. And then we're going to do a very small amount of Nuln oil on the gold of his shoulder pad here. So let me go ahead and get some glue. I believe I know how this is supposed to fit, so this should be good. I think, yeah. Or, I just shifted it. Nope. No one panic. Except for maybe me. Let's hope if I got the glue off of my fingers so that I stopped sticking to him. There we go. Alright, so we're just gonna hold him like that. The way that I try to glue pieces together sometimes, especially if I'm having a hard time with them sliding around and I'm feeling like the plastic isn't really sitting together, is I find where it looks like it should, like where there should be a seam from where the glue should be, and I just hold it in place, and hopefully, like, I hope that makes sense. But I just try to find a place that looks like, oh, okay, that is supposed to be flat to each other. Let me hold it there and make sure that it stays in that position so that the rest of it is also in position. I find that's a little bit easier. Let's go and pull my hand away. Hopefully I'm not sticking too much. All right, cool. So we're just going to let him dry a little bit with his arm there, and then we'll get him attached to the base. So we will be back once he is fully attached, and at that point we will do our wash, and we will also put our tufts on our base, and we will be able to call him done. So I'll see you in just a few minutes. He is all but done. We just need to do two final things. So the last thing that we have to do is we're going to Agrax Earthshade the fleshy part of his wing, and probably the fur. We're going to also use that on the red of the cloth. And then what we're going to do for the gold here on his shoulder piece is we're going to use Carroburg Crimson to give it a little bit of a red hue. We used that on the spy ranks, so I liked it a lot with that. So we're going to use it here to just give it a little bit more of a hue. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to take these tufts and we're going to go ahead and tuft him, and then he will be finished and we can photograph him and all that stuff, and I'll have another completed miniature and he'll match very nicely with this other Flesh Eater Quartz guy that we have from one of the Night Vault, I believe, sets, or Shadespire, or one of those ones. But let's go ahead and get to this Agrax Earthshade real quick. So this was kind of an experiment for me because my color choices, I hadn't really, oddly enough, despite the fact that this guy is very similar color toned, I believe he was actually we used Nazdreg yellow on his skin, whereas this is the leather, and I really like how it came out. It's very similar, but there's a very subtle difference, and there's a lot of shade. Hold on. And I really, really like it, but they still go very well together. And this was a really fun experiment for me. I hadn't really played too much with these color tones in the past, like on a vampire creature like this, and I really, really dig it. So I'll probably continue to use this on some of these creatures if I get more of them. And he is finished. And really, I think abhorrent is the wrong word to describe him, because this boy turned out quite lovely. I think the touch-up of his shoulder went exceptionally well. I'm very pleased. I feel like you can't really tell that I took a very large portion of the paint off when I was gluing that because it slid. The red really pops very beautifully against him. He stands out wonderfully against the terrain piece that I did last week, which is very, very cool, especially since I've not actually really painted a mini in this many pieces before, like to this level. And so the fact that I was able to coordinate the colors, because that is something that I personally struggle with painting. It's one of the reasons that for a really long time for the hobby I didn't, is because colors in me just sometimes I don't understand them very well. But I feel like I've really started to get better at that, especially since John, I think, understands them very well, and he's been helping me with my color choices. And this just turned out fantastic. I love the charcoal color I got on his hands and everything, and honestly, I think this is the best mini I've done so far, maybe barring the spy ranks, but I think right now I'm feeling more happy with this one than I did that one at the very end. I also kept it very simple with the basing. I just put 2 tufts. I put one large one sort of recessed back into this groove here, and then I put a small one up here. Originally, I was debating putting one here, but I wanted the rat to still stand out by himself and not get covered up too much by the tuft, and so I just left it blank because I think this looks appropriate. And yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you guys have painted this miniature yourselves, let me know what you did for your color scheme, and we will see you next week with another painting video.